Where there's a will, right?
DMC2, what a game you are. Flawed, rushed, and only barely salvaged during development. With only 4 to 5 months left in development, Hideaki Itsuno had to come in as the director and steer the dumpster fire that was you. Reviewers and fans alike hated you and still hate you to this day. Hell, even I poked fun at you the last time. Even when I played you again after 7 long years of really not touching you at all, I wanted to find reasons to defend it, or even prop you up a bit. This might be a form of sentimentality speaking, but I don't actually hate this game. I actually kind of enjoy it and would hold it up a bit. Not as much as the real trendsetters like DMC's 1, 3, 4, and 5 per se, but at least enough to garner 1 to 2 playthroughs every now and again. DMC2 is actually kind of a fun game when you actually take a dive into it, as on the outset it seems pretty bland and boring. The game actually has depth and it can be taken to a different level of play other than the standard why don't I take you down a few lanes and lines of thought when it comes to DMC2, and see if I can't soften the blow or even find a way to make DMC2 seem fun, huh? Let me start with the very first thing that people complain about.
Dante.
Dante in this game is very aloof and serious compared to Dante in 1 being somewhat serious, but took fun in taking the piss out of anything that stood in his way. DMC1 Dante is old school action guy's cheese, and DMC2 Dante is a coin-tossing mercenary type. While I can see the problems in DMC2 Dante, he's got a certain charm to him in my eyes. His design is a very strong contender for one of the best in the series, hands down. The only design that could beat it out would be DMC4 Dante, but that's for another day. After a playthrough or two, I began to like this Dante for his own little quirks. And sure, there isn't much to his animations that are all usually pretty rigid looking, but there's a sense of strength and flow that's evident from how he swings his sword and how the man uses it. Hell, even with the guns he shows some pizzazz from how the man stands or from even how he uses a shotgun. There's personality for this Dante. You just gotta look for it and have some fun. Speaking of weapons, oh boy.
I'm playing DMC2, get your entire combo.
Okay, yes, you can juggle enemies with ebony and ivory. Haha, very funny meme, 10 out of 10 joke, everyone said it. But this game was designed with a heavy emphasis on gunplay in mind. Hence enemies like the demon babies, the harpies, and even the fucking goats that Satan decided to let out of his barn. Gunplay and how Dante works with guns is a focus in this game, and sure, it makes his moveset very static with swords, but there's still things you can do with a static character. Guns can be used in a variety of ways. You could use them as they were intended in DMC1 and use them as combo fodder in keeping enemies juggled or even planted. You could use them as combo enders in the shotgun's case, or even the rocket launcher. If you need it though, you could also use them as DT builders like Ebony and Ivory and the submachine guns. Okay, and if we're gonna keep talking about guns, look, if we're gonna criticize DMC2 for using guns for everything, what about DMC1? What about Griffin? What about Nightmare? What about the fucking nobodies? What about the shadows? What about the sins? Enemies that are either designed or even recommended for being shot at. Guns in DMC1 usually were like 8 out of 10 times they were optional, and at higher difficulties it feels like 4 out of 10 times because things like air raid were more important for dealing damage and just killing bosses and certain enemies without that much of a hassle. Okay, speaking of hassles, oh boy. The infected helicopter, one of the most reviled things of this game. Let's have some fun trying to see the good in this fight, okay? So, this isn't a fight about Dante and a helicopter. It's a fight all about Dante's movement and how he feels to really move with. All the jumps from inside and across buildings to the final climb up the skyscraper where you really take on the boss is actually really cool and exemplifies how Dante feels to control. Despite feeling weightier in combat, he feels pretty smooth when running and jumping from place to place, actually. Sure, the boss is like 90% gun, but at least the boss moves in to even show that Dante has some air combat. This boss, sure, it fails at being a DMC boss, but it exceeds at being a showcase of Dante and what he can do. There are other uses for guns other than...
Die. Oh. Granny?
Now, the Devil Arms really don't make Dante in this game. If anything, it's mostly numbers and averages, but in this game they were trying out new waters, alright? And in these waters, Dante is a static man. But as I mentioned earlier, static characters can still have their brand of fun and even be enjoyable to play. Okay, because let's be honest here, how many skills really changed Dante? Like, seriously changed Dante in one? Ifrit is the only real moveset change Dante had, and even then, Sparta was just Alistair with more damage and a slight variance on certain moves like Stinger and Round Trip. If anything, Dante only gained more options instead of really changing him at a fundamental level. Dante gets Stinger for both weapons, a weapon projectile, and a DT-based move. Weapons make Dante, no matter the game he's in, and in this game, the guns make him who he is instead of the Devil Arms, which is an interesting change of pace and led to something new and different. Okay, so enough about Dante and his guns and what they do for him. How does Dante move in this game? Well, he's improved while also taking a step back. Let me explain. So you know how you could jump cancel certain moves in DMC1, like the first sword attack, and thus made Dante interesting to control and gave a good amount of feedback to the player? Well, we've got an on-command dodge now that can be used in that vein. Hell, if you wanted to, you could use DT to fill the same role as a cancel. Dante in 2 is slower than DMC1 Dante, but he hits just as hard as Dante from 1. But as mentioned earlier from the infested copter fight,
do I smell soiled baby diaper?
Dante, when he's moving around, definitely feels a lot more fluid and free. It's just that when he's fighting that it becomes a bit of an oddity and a little bit of a struggle when really trying to get things down. The pace of the game as a whole is just slower than 1, but that doesn't necessarily mean that playing through it is a slog. If anything, it's just as short as DMC1. Dante's campaign takes 2 hours to beat, and Lucia's barely an hour and a half. Speaking of which, Lucia, the new character made for this game, and it's a shame how underdeveloped her story is. Yes, as much as I want to defend this dumpster fire of a game and speak the praises that you can find in it, Lucia is poorly handled. Lucia and her story is definitely the main focus, since she gets the most cutscenes, meanwhile Dante is just here for the ride, and I honestly don't mind that. While Dante has been through this song and dance time and time again, as it's assumed here, Lucia has a story that gives her a connection to the main villain, kinda like Trish, only except she defected right from the get-go. Lucia, if given time to develop both her and Arius instead of
I created clones of you, Kai. Now give Arcanas. Your monster might hurt the humans.
Okay, her arc revolves around Arius, but thankfully Granny swoops in to give a relatively heartwarming message about what it really means to be connected and feel like family. It's not by blood that we're connected, but the bonds we forged in our time together. If I could describe Lucia's entire story arc in a few words, it'd be realization and determination. She realizes that she could become one of her clones and fears that very notion, to the point where she becomes pretty nihilistic about her own existence.
Kill me. Kill me and everything will be over. I could become a monster and attack the humans at any time! Now, kill me. I'll go. I'm expendable. You don't need to worry about me. I'm happy if I can die like a human.
Lucia is an interesting character, and if given enough time or a second chance, she could really shine and something could come out of her arc of wanting to break away from her monstrous fate. Possessed Arius is the best thing that Lucia will ever get.
Arius? It seems I have to finish him off myself.
Here, and I'd say it's justice even if Arius Argosax is actual ass. Okay, So, aside from her story, her gameplay style is interesting as she gives the player more mobility and is more free to move around and do some neat combos too. She can dynamic entry motherfuckers out of her lock-on dodge, which if you want, you could extend combos and it would allow for some more fast-paced gameplay instead of Dante's more slower and hard-hitting style of play. So if you're not down for Dante, Lucia might be up your alley. Okay, before I move on to like the game's total length, let me talk about the game's idea of devil trigger variants. Okay, so have you ever wanted Dante to walk into a Build-A-Bear workshop and just come out of the workshop with an entire DT bear that shot lightnings out of its paws? That's how DT is in this game. You build it yourself, either to the situation you see fit or how you just want to play the game. Some are related to progression like Aerial Heart, Quick Heart, Water Heart. DT does many things. It changes the bonuses you get and even changes the combos you have access to. DT has a decent amount of variance, and when you find a new piece to the amulet, it's always a nice treat just to get zapped with a new DT power. Okay, so now that I've talked about Dante and Lucia in terms of their gameplay and even story significance, what about the land of Vidomali? The entire place the game takes place on is bigger, wider, and more contemporary for the most part in comparison to Malay Island from 1. This is a sticking point for people as DMC2 has a lot of open space with nothing in them, and in which case, they're right. Most of the areas have not much going on in them, and everything is bigger. However, despite the size of these areas, missions are still short and nothing drags on for far too long. Even when there's nothing happening in, like, the early missions of Dante's story, there's events like the train car ride or even the elevator ride in Mission 17. As an aside, there are 31 missions in total. 18 of them are Dante with his usual sword-slinging and gun-toting gameplay, whereas Lucia only has 13 missions, which drastically cuts down on her game time. Okay, so a major sticking point with this game is the fact that it reuses content in each story. So you're going to be going through this pretty much the same areas with both characters. At the very least, there's slight variance to how certain missions function or how they structure themselves. So at the very least, you're not playing the exact game twice over. It's still a major problem with the game and how it's fundamentally made in order to really pad out the game. But again, at the very least, there's some differences to make the experience feel different, or at the very least memorable for that character. At the very least, you gotta commend the game for the way it transitions from an eerie island town to a corrupt and demon-infested city. Mid-late game makes the transition, again, just a lot more fucked up and coated in demonic growths all over the rest of the game. It's small details, sometimes very apparent, but at the very least, they're details nonetheless that you can admire for the game and what it tried to do. Now, before I get to the ending of this video and really wrap things up, I need to mention one last thing. One really good thing about the game. The soundtrack. For as flawed as this game is, this soundtrack is something else, man. It is a pretty great step up from DMC1's music. From the ambience of like the catacombs, to the city, or even like the demonic infested Ouroboros building, to the battle themes or the boss battle themes. Everything just works and sounds really good, and really just makes me enjoy the experience a whole lot more. A lot of them really sound good, and it's the best part about this game that I can imagine that a lot of people will agree with. The soundtrack is the best part about the game, and everyone will say, well, don't play the game and just listen to the soundtrack. I mean, why not do both? You can still have fun with a bad game if it has a really good soundtrack. lot of people play Sonic 06 and still find ways to enjoy it. Why not DMC2? Okay, Devil May Cry 2 is an unfortunate case of mismanagement and not really meeting expectations of the game that came before it. It could have led to something great if given more time in the oven. With what we have now, it's a struggle to really put into words how the game itself can be fun despite the state it's in. Most people are going to shoot it down for being the black sheep of the franchise, and therefore just skip the game entirely. Hell, it's what I did for the longest time, telling people to just move on to 3. If you finish 1, try 2 and see what you think. You might end up like the majority, or you might end up like me and enjoy the mess that is DMC2. But that's all up to what you think, Hunter.